Hi everyone, Katja here. So, I thought I was going to be back to giving you the one book video reviews, but if I tried that, we would have a video a day from me between now and the new year. And as much as I'd love to think that you'd be into that, even I don't want a daily video from one of my favorite booktubers. So instead, we continue with the recent reads roundups. And this is going to be a mix of backlist and some very new books, most of them cozy. Let's start with I Decided to Live as Me by Kim Soo-Hyun and translated by Anton Her, South Korean bestseller about embracing your authentic self. And it got me thinking about living a creative life. And by that, I don't mean chucking in the 9 to 5 to become a full-time artist, but more in the sense that we hear about creative living these days, the sense of creating a life that feels true to you, a life shaped by your values, decisions, and aspirations. Now, maybe you're building a rooftop aviary for your bees, or carving out time for something that others consider unconventional, such as having a booktube channel. It's about coloring outside the box in a way that's uniquely yours. The book encourages authenticity, even when it means defying societal expectations. It's not a how to guide, it won't give you a roadmap, but it does invite you to reflect on whether your life aligns with who you want to be. And the format is fun. As you can see, the chapters are structured as checklists, and the book is dotted with charming illustrations. It's designed for dipping in and out of. So if you were tempted to try and read it straight through, you're going to find it a bit disjointed. For me, this wasn't a 5-star read. Some sections felt oversimplified, especially if you're navigating circumstances that don't allow for easy change. That said, the core message resonates. Criticism of authenticity often says more about the critic than it does about you, unless, of course, your authenticity is a mask for shirking responsibility or having avoidant behaviors. So it encourages self reflection, encourages a balance between shrinking yourself to suit others and falling into people pleasing, but also about remembering to not only be kind, but to be considerate. That balance of your needs and other people's needs. This book is a gentle nudge toward self reflection and gave me, pause for thought. If you've read I Want to Die, but I Want to Eat Tteokbokki by Baek Si-hee, you'll find that both books sit quite comfortably within the Korean non-fiction self-healing genre, but I found this one so much more relatable. Tteokbokki was a solid 3 stars for me, but this one edges more towards 4 stars. And it's one that I'm going to keep on my physical bookshelf, whereas the other one I gave away. The key difference lies in their approaches. Tteokbokki draws heavily on the author's recorded therapy sessions, which can sometimes feel like eavesdropping on a private conversation. In contrast, I Decided to Live as Me engages you directly, inviting you into its reflections in a more accessible, interactive way. That directness, it made all the difference for me, making this book not only more engaging, but also more practical in its insights, despite it not being or attempting to be a roadmap. Next up, we have a very different book, Nine Continents by Xiaolu Guo, a memoir. And it completely floored me. I loved it, but it's so, yeah, it's stunning. A buddy read with Freddie from Sluggish Reader, who, despite his name, is one of the least sluggish readers I know out there. He's read so many good books recently if you check out his channel. This book follows Guo and her journey from a remote fishing village in China to becoming an acclaimed writer and filmmaker. Raw, personal, deeply thought provoking, her reflections on identity, language, and belonging are as poignant as they are challenging. The messy, complex relationships with her family added cultural and generational layers that elevated this beyond a typical memoir for me, and it's definitely a window into a rapidly changing society. It's also filled with loads of triggers. So, trigger warning here, which I didn't know about. Lots of different types of abuse, threat, and more. And through it all, she has a steady approach to life. And I think some of that resilience is shaped by the realization that her paternal grandmother had such an awful life, which is alluded to in the book. I think it's like tip of the iceberg stuff. But Guo is never unaware of her good fortune when it happens. It's almost like she can think back and consider how thrilled her grandmother would be for her. So even though she lives a life that is still filled with terrible hardship and traumas, she has these bright spots or moments mixed in that she really appreciates and moves in some very, very positive directions. And in terms of that resilience, she also reflects on something that happens with a classmate, which I won't go into too much detail about. But it made me think it's very true that sometimes we will look at people and we make assumptions about what their resilience is, but it never is truly reflected. You can't tell what's going on the inside for someone. It sounds a little bit cryptic, but like I say, I don't want to give anything away. But there's certainly a theme of resilience that I come back to when I think about this book. Now, Freddie and I couldn't stop marveling at Gore's spontaneity. There were moments where we were like, did she just leap into that again without a second thought? And Freddie pointed out for one bit, well, she didn't have the internet back then for that. And that's so true because either in my late teens, I was just more spontaneous or I had no choice but to be that way because in the late 90s, there wasn't all this at your fingertips Googling. It made me wonder, am I too cautious now or am I just better informed? And I haven't come to a decision. But anyway, maybe I do need to sprinkle some leap before you look energy into life. It worked out for her at least half of the time. Anyway, if you enjoy memoirs that dig into personal struggles while exploring broader cultural themes, I think Nine Continents is a must read, and I'm picking up more from her in the future. Then, Book 3, Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood. This brims with 90s witchy vibes, London charm, and an uplifting message about self love. It follows Belladonna Blackthorn, a burned out witch who is working in a bookshop, so that's fun, and she has to reconnect with her magic or risk losing it. Along the way, she faces magical trials, quirky friendships, and a slow burn romance. Now, the book for me shines in relationships, particularly the one between Belle and her friend Ariadne, which felt genuine and heartfelt. The cozy atmosphere was another highlight, with the audiobook's northern accents transporting me beyond London's blustery streets. And somehow the story just didn't live up to its potential for me because the pacing was uneven, long introspective passages often stole the momentum, and key events felt rushed or underexplored. The magical trials had an intriguing premise but lacked depth, and the romance, though sweet, felt a bit underdeveloped. But what stood out for me the most was the book's message. It's okay to embrace uncertainty, rebuild, and find joy in the process of figuring things out. It leans into familiar tropes, but you know what? It was comforting overall. Despite my criticism, I think there's a lot of warmth that you can take away over complexity. Book 4, The Healing Season of Pottery by Yeon Somin. And this book I stumbled across. I'm not sure why I haven't seen more about it. Translated by Claire Richards. It's a healing novel, fiction though. It appealed to me because when I read the blurb, it sounded like Welcome to the Hunamdong bookshop, but swapping out books for pottery. So I was like, yay. Jungmin, a burned out TV writer, retreats into isolation until she stumbles upon Soyu, a pottery studio, where through the calming rhythms of shaping clay and the quiet companionship of others, she slowly begins to reshape her life. So I felt empathy for Jungmin from the start, especially when you could sense that her self isolation after she leaves her job had finally moved beyond healing, and now she wasn't sure how to integrate back into the outside world. And you might wonder how someone gets to the stage of locking themselves away. And though I haven't, I can picture it. My career path to becoming a project manager also spanned so many years, too many years, working on healthcare complaints. Directly on the lines, a role with the average staff retention of 2 years, and I did 4 times that. Listening to grievances, even from the kindest of complainants, is exhausting. And that's not counting the abuse that quite a few people hurl at you simply because you're the voice of the system that they're frustrated at. So it takes a toll, as do so many jobs. I have friends who work in care homes, and that job is so undervalued and underpaid. Anyway, Jungmin's situation made sense to me. Craving solitude as a survival mechanism, her retreat and her eventual reemergence, I think, will resonate with a lot of readers. I appreciated the thoughtful critique of the realistic pressures we face in modern society. Jungman's burnout isn't framed as individual failure, which I think maybe years ago it was, like, oh, you can't hack it sort of thing. But it's framed, as we accept more readily now, as an inevitable result of toxic, high pressure industries. The novel also acknowledges her privilege, her ability to take that time off and live off her savings while healing, which is a luxury not everyone can afford. The self awareness adds depth, I think, preventing the story from feeling too idealized. The tone is quiet, reflective, and steeped in the soothing details of pottery. So the studio that Jungmin finds, is vividly brought to life really well. Sunlight filtering through ivy-covered windows, the earthy smell of clay, and the comforting presence of a resident cat. It becomes not just a physical space, but a sanctuary for Jungmin, a place where she can start to find herself again, and the act of shaping clay becomes a poignant metaphor for her personal journey, while the community she finds there adds to her self discovery. From the person with infectious laugh to the grumpy teen everyone is rooting for, and most interestingly, the older man who makes Jungmin face long buried and painful memories. That said, the book isn't without its flaws. The romantic subplot, while subtle, felt unnecessary and underdeveloped, as does the romantic interest backstory. It was almost as though something had been edited out. So the pacing is occasionally slow due to too much introspection, and while the early chapters seem to promise a deeper connection between reader and main character, I often felt held at arm's length from her world, which occasionally dulled the emotional impact for me. But I'm being very, very critical. It's, a gentle, soothing read, perfect for fans of introspective healing novels. And while it didn't quite reach the emotional depths that I was just automatically assuming it would, it beautifully captures the quiet magic of rebuilding your life one small step or one lump of clay at a time. So, would I reread it? Probably not, but it did leave me with these positive vibes and a sudden urge to take a pottery class. So, yeah, positive. Book 5, The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. This book was a bit of a slog for me for the first few chapters, so I was really surprised because it started slow and I didn't feel hooked. But when it found its rhythm, I was suddenly, fully invested, and by the end, it's a solid 4-star rating from me. The story follows Tao, a wandering teller of fortunes who sticks to the small fortunes rather than having to deal with the consequences of predicting larger ones. Her solitary, self contained life shifts when she reluctantly is drawn into a quest to find a missing child. And along the way, she's joined by a magical, delightful, sassy cat, a sunny baker, and two unlikely heroes, a semi reformed thief and a gruff mercenary. At its heart, the book explores themes of found family, self discovery, and the immigrant experience. It's not just about magical adventures, it delves into questions of belonging, identity, and just themes that may resonate for some readers. The immigrant perspective, in particular, added a layer of thoughtfulness to the narrative that I really appreciated. It got me thinking about language and labels. An English friend of mine has been living abroad for over a decade and is still called an expat. When I asked if they saw themselves settling where they are, they said, for all intents and purposes, but not officially. In other words, they're not intending coming to live in the UK again, English born and bred. It made me reflect how expat often implies higher socioeconomic status, while immigrant carries different connotations. This book raises such questions subtly but effectively. Ta's reflections on why her mother brought her to live in a country where she's immediately seen as foreign or other echoes real life dilemmas at the moment about identity, belonging, and how people have to navigate the space between feeling kinship and alienation. The cast of characters in this book is a highlight. Tao's companions are vibrant and memorable, each of them bringing something to the table. Fidelitas, the cat, adds a delightful dose of humor and whimsy and is oh so scrappy, while Kina, the baker, shines in her journey of self discovery through her passion for pastries. Their dynamics felt authentic and brought warmth to the story. The pacing, though, was a bit uneven. It's slow at the beginning, and a key event near the end just felt too convenient. Still, the gentle tone, the thoughtful world building more than made up for it. The story celebrates finding your people, embracing your individuality, and realizing that meaningful connections are often what life is truly made of. Perfect for readers who enjoy found family, whimsical adventures, and a side of reflection. And then we have our final book, The Restaurant of Lost Recipes by Hisashi Kashiwai, translated by Jessie Kirkwood. And this is the sequel to the Kamogawa Food Detectives, which I loved and shared with you before. It works as a continuation, but also as a standalone. Set in a quiet Kyoto diner, Chef Nagari and his daughter Koshi help customers recover dishes tied to cherished memories. So they've got an idea of what the dishes are, but they just don't know how to recreate them themselves. So they go to this detective agency, which is really a detective agency for food. The book weaves six interlinked stories, each exploring food as a portal to the past. So I love the description of how these characters come in and the main character manages to recreate their dishes, comforting aroma of childhood soup that takes them back to particular points in their life. It's wonderfully described and turns the meals into these emotional anchors. Kyoto itself is also a fantastic backdrop, very serene, especially for the restaurant itself, where you've mostly just got the clink of cutlery and crockery of the patrons of the restaurant, and then the focus on the actual discussions between the patrons and the daughter. So these are simple, heartfelt stories of love, loss, and healing. And while the episodic structure is comforting, it does sometimes feel repetitive, which I don't mind. I like that, but you might find formulaic. Each one is about a mystery dish, a resolution, and a bittersweet moment of closure. But I think if you're a fan of Before the Coffee Gets Cold, or even closer, the Japanese TV series Midnight Diner, you'll probably appreciate the gentle pace and emotional resonance here. Be aware that they don't go to the places that these dishes come from, so there's not much traveling involved. It's low stakes and it has tidy endings, which might not be for everyone, but I would certainly recommend it to anyone who's just looking for something soothing and introspective and just not very taxing on your mind when you want to have some escapism. And that's it for today's roundup. As you can tell, they were mostly cozy, aside from the memoir, which was really hard hitting, but was so worth it, as were most of these. Let me know if you found anything interesting amongst these stories that I've shared with you, or if you've read any of them, what you thought about them. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.